Ruth Aldous, 38 and 8 years a widow, wrapped one warm loaf in a clean cloth and set it on the gatepost of her holding, the way her mother had, so the parish's travelling poor would know where to look. She never watched to see who took it. That was the whole of the kindness. You left it, and you turned your back, and you let a hungry stranger keep his pride along with his bread. Every Thursday, for 2 years, a man on a good grey horse rode past on a road 4 miles longer than the direct way home. He never once took the loaf, and the land agent had already told her what her softness was worth. "That's Crane's business now, not yours," he said. The whole Coombe answers to the bank by Michaelmas. Then came the Thursday the loaf was gone before he passed, and on the post, where the bread had been, she found something left in its place. If you believe it's never too late for the heart, this story is for you. Before we go on, if these quiet stories mean something to you, take a moment to subscribe and comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this quiet story travels. Now, let me tell you how it began. Coombe Hallow sat low in the Wiltshire downland, folded between 2 long green shoulders of chalk. In the autumn of 1874, the light came slantwise off the fields and turned the stubble gold by 4 in the afternoon. It was a small place, a church, a smithy, a scatter of holdings along the Coombe Road, and the great house up on the ridge that nobody spoke of much anymore. Ruth's holding was the 3rd gate along, 2 acres and a bit, a cottage of grey stone, a garden gone to leeks and late beans. She had it from her husband, and her husband had it from his father, and the whole of it would have fit inside a corner of the fields that rose behind her. But it was hers. She had kept it 8 years alone, and she had asked no man for a shilling to do it. She baked on Thursdays. That was the day her mother had baked, and her mother's mother before, back to a time nobody could name. The oven was a beehive of brick built into the wall by the hearth, and Ruth fed it with furze and old apple wood until the bricks went white. When the loaves came out, they were dark on top and soft within, and the smell of them filled the lane. She always made one more than she needed. That was the custom. The extra loaf went out to the gatepost, wrapped in a square of clean linen her mother had hemmed by hand. It was for the travelling poor, the tinkers, the broken soldiers, the women walking from one parish to the next with a child on the hip and nowhere to be. The vagrancy law was hard on such people. A man could be whipped for sleeping in a barn. But the parish looked kindly on a loaf left in the open, and the rector himself had blessed the custom from the pulpit, so nobody troubled Ruth about it. She was known in the Coombe, known the way water is known, or bread. You did not remark on her. You only missed her when she was gone. When the Hobbs girl took the fever, it was Ruth they sent for. A foundling, that child, taken in by the Hobbs family off the road, and half the village thought fevers in such children were nothing to spend candles on. Ruth spent the candles. She sat up 3 nights, and she read the fever like other women read the weather. She knew when the skin went dry and when it broke. She knew the hour the danger turned. By the 4th morning the child was asking for milk, and Ruth walked home in the grey light and put her oven on, because it was a Thursday, and the loaf still had to be made. When Job Weller laid his hand open on a billhook, hedging the top field, it was Ruth who cleaned it and drew the edges together with her mother's needle and a length of waxed thread. She would take nothing for it. "Bring me a basket of your damsons in the autumn," she said, "and we're square." And in the autumn he brought the damsons, and she made him think the bargain had favoured her. That was Ruth. She gave, and she made the giving feel like a trade, so that no one should ever have to feel small in front of her. It was the thing she was proudest of, and it was the thing that blinded her, though she did not know that yet. The rider came into her life the way weather comes, slowly, and then as if he had always been there. It was a Thursday in early October when she first marked him. She was carrying the wrapped loaf out to the post, and she heard the walk of a horse on the road, unhurried, and she looked up. A grey horse, a good one, deep in the chest and clean in the leg. A man on its back in a dark coat, neither new nor poor, a plain hat, a plain seat. He was not young. 42 she'd have guessed, with grey coming at the temple and a face that had stopped expecting things. He rode past her gate at a walk. He looked at her. He looked at the loaf on the post, and then he looked back at the road and rode on toward the ridge. She thought nothing of it that first week. Men rode the Coombe Road, but the next Thursday he came again, at the same hour on the same grey horse, and again he passed, and again he did not stop, and the Thursday after that. And Ruth, who noticed things the way she noticed a change in a fever, began to notice him. He never took the loaf. That was the curious part. A poor man would have taken it, or a proud poor man would have taken it late, after dark, when no one could see. This man rode past it in the full light of afternoon, and never so much as slowed. And yet he came. Every Thursday, at the baking hour, along a road that led up to the ridge and the great house, and nowhere a working man had business. She turned it over in her mind, the way she turned over dough. And because she was a woman who liked to have a place for everything, she gave him one. He must be the new tenant, she decided. There was a farm at the far end of the parish, up under the ridge, that had stood empty, and then had a new man in it, come from off, nobody knew from where. A struggling man, by all accounts. The land there was thin and the rent was hard. That was who the rider was. A proud man come down in the world, riding the long way round to spare himself the eyes of the village, too proud to take charity bread, but not too proud to look at it. It made a kind of sense. It made the sort of sense that lets a mind stop working on a thing. And so Ruth stopped working on it, and she was wrong in every part, and it would cost her before it was done. A carter set her nearer the truth than she knew, one market morning, and she walked straight past it. He'd come down the ridge road with a load of hurdles, and he stopped to water his horse at her trough, and he nodded up the way he'd come. Bad going on the master's road, he said. Rains cut it to the chalk above the spinney. The master's road, she said, only half hearing. Aye, and he clicked to his horse and went on. She thought nothing of it. The gate at the foot of her lane had stood on thorn land since her grandfather's day. Everyone knew that. The whole Coombe, from the low gate to the high ridge, had been thorns since before the church tower was raised. But she never thought about who the master was now, any more than she thought about who owned the sky. It was a name on a milestone. It had nothing to do with a loaf of bread. The rider, one Thursday, touched the brim of his hat to her as he passed. Just once. A small motion, barely a motion at all, the fingers to the brim and away. She was at the post with the loaf in her hands. She did not know what to do, so she did nothing, and he rode on before she could have done anything, and she stood there with the warm loaf between her palms and her face gone unaccountably hot. That was the whole of it. He tipped his hat, and he rode on. Up on the ridge, in the great house, the master of Coombe Hallow could not go through his own front door. It was not a thing he could have explained to anyone, because he had never tried. Nathaniel Thorne was 44, and he owned everything the eye could reach from his own windows, and for 9 years he had arranged his days around one small task, which was to not be inside his house until the light was gone. He rose late. He rode out. He saw to the far fields and the near ones, the drains and the walls and the beasts, and he made the seeing to last as long as a day could be made to last. And when the work ran out, as work always did, he rode. He rode the Coombe and the down and the long chalk track above the spinney, and he timed it, without ever admitting he was timing it, so that he came back to his own gate as the sun went behind the ridge. Because after dark the house was only a house. It was walls and a fire and a bed, and a man could bear that. But in the daylight the house was full of things he could not look at, and the worst of them was a door on the upper landing that had not been opened in 9 years. His wife's name had been Clara. Their child had not lived long enough to be given a name that anyone used. He had lost them both in the same week, the child first and then the mother, in the raw end of a February, and the doctor had come up from Bramfield twice a day on a lathered horse and had been able to do nothing at all. The nursery had been made ready before either of them died. The cradle was in it, and the small folded things, and a chair by the window where Clara had meant to sit. Thorne had shut that door on the day of the second funeral, and he had not opened it since. He was not a hard man. That was the thing the parish had got wrong in the 9 years they'd let him alone. They thought him proud, or cold, or broken past mending, and so they left him to it, and their leaving him to it had become its own kind of wall. He was only a man who had found a way to get through the hours, and the way was to fill them, and to fill the last and worst hour of the day, the hour when the light failed and the house waited. He rode the long way home. The long way home took him past the low gate, past the third holding on the Coombe Road, where a woman baked on Thursdays and set a loaf on the post for people poorer than herself. He had marked the loaf before he had marked the woman. A wrapped white shape on a grey post, week after week, at the same hour. It had puzzled him, the first months, the way a small kindness puzzles a man who has stopped expecting to see any. Then he had understood what it was, and it had done something to him he could not have named. He had lost his wife and child and his own use for the daylight, and here, at the foot of the ridge he owned, a woman with almost nothing left bread out in the open for strangers, and asked nothing, and did not even wait to be thanked. He could have taken the loaf, and he never did, because it was not his, it was for the poor, and whatever he was not that. But he rode past it every Thursday, and somewhere in the second year he stopped telling himself he rode that way because of the house. The two habits met at a gatepost, and neither of them had ever been meant as a message. That was the engine of the whole thing, though neither of them knew it. A woman who left bread and did not look, and a man who rode past bread he would not take, each of them keeping an hour they could not have explained, and each of them thinking the other was somebody they were not. The parish saw them together before they had ever spoken a word. It was market day at Bramfield, the county town, 4 miles off down the valley. Ruth went in most weeks with butter and eggs, and in the autumn with baskets of the damsons and the last of the beans. She had her place on the low wall by the corn cross, and she knew the faces round her, and among them was Mrs. Peel. Mrs. Peel had the holding next to Ruth's and a tongue that ran on rails. She was a good woman under it, and she loved Ruth the way you love someone you have decided needs looking after, whether or not they've asked. She had watched the Thursday Loaf and the Thursday Rider for the best part of 2 years, and she had made up a story out of them the way Ruth had, only Mrs. Peel's story had a wedding in it. On this market day the grey horse was tied outside the Lamb, and the rider was in the crowd by the corn cross, buying nothing that anyone could see, only standing in the way a man stands when he has come to town to be among people for an hour and then go home. He was near enough to Ruth's place on the wall that a person minded to make something of it could make something of it. And Mrs. Peel was that person. "There's your gentleman," she said to Ruth, not near quietly enough, "the one you feed every Thursday, the far farm tenant." And then, to the woman on her other side, pleased as a cat, "She feeds him every week, you know. Sets a loaf out on her own gate for him, regular as the church clock." It went round the wall the way such things go. A little laugh, a little warmth, a few kind eyes turned on Ruth, who sat straight-backed with her hands folded on her apron and her face gone the colour of her own oven bricks. It was not unkindly meant. That was the worst of it. They liked her, and they liked the story, and they were glad for her, and every ounce of their gladness landed on her like a stone. Because the loaf had never been for him, and she could not say so without making more of it than she could bear. She looked, once, at the rider. He had heard. She was certain he had heard. He was near enough, and the wall had not been quiet. And he did nothing. He did not smile, and he did not frown, and he did not step forward to set it right. He looked at her for the length of a breath, and then he looked away, and let it stand. Let the whole market believe she fed him. Let her be the woman who baked for the poor tenant she was sweet on. She could not know why. She could not know that being taken for a poor tenant was, to him, a kind of rest. That to be no one in particular, a struggling man on a hired farm. A man a kind woman might leave bread for was easier to be than the master of Coombhallow, who had buried his family and shut a door and could not go home in the light. She only saw a man let a lie stand that shamed her, and she gathered her baskets a little early that day and drove her cart home up the valley with her jaw set. And she did not leave a loaf out the next Thursday until the very last of the light, when she was sure the road was empty. But he had ridden past early that week and seen the bare post, and he had felt the loss of it like a change in the weather over his own fields. The trouble came in on paper, as the worst trouble does. Silas Crane was the land agent for the Bramfield and County Bank, and he was a man who wore his arrogance in the open, the way other men wear a watch chain. The bank held paper on half the coombe, old mortgages, small ones, the sort of debt a smallholder carries the way he carries a limp, year on year, paying the interest and never the sum. Ruth had such a debt. £42 her husband had borrowed against the holding in a bad season, and she had paid the interest faithful as a tithe for 8 years, and never once been troubled about the whole. Crane meant to trouble her now. He meant to trouble the whole coombe. He posted his notices on a Thursday, which she would afterward think was a small cruelty of its own, and one of them he tacked to her own gate-post, over the very place the loaf went, and he was standing by it when she came out. Mrs. Aldous. He did not get down. He read the notice to her off the post, though she could read it herself. The bank was calling in the arrears on the Coombe holdings, the principal in full by Michaelmas, the 29th of September, or the holding reverted. £42. She had that morning £4 and some shillings in the tin behind the clock. She stood very straight and said she had always paid her interest. Interest? He smiled at the word. He looked at the notice and at the bare post beneath it where the linen still hung from its habit, and he made the connection with the ease of a man who had made a career of other people's ruin. "I'm told you give your bread away, Mrs. Aldous, every week. To the road." He let that sit. A woman who gives her bread away has none to sell. The bank counts loaves, Mrs. Aldous, not kindness. Then he touched his hat, exactly as the rider had, only nothing at all like the rider, and he rode on to nail his next notice to the next gate, and left her standing in her own lane with a scrap of paper flapping over the place her mother's custom had lived for 50 years. £42 by Michaelmas. It was the whole of it, and there was no whole of it to be had. She did not cry. She went in, and she banked the oven because it was a Thursday, and she made the loaves. And when they were done, she made the extra one, and she wrapped it, and she carried it out past Crane's notice, and set it on the post beneath the paper, because she would be damned before she let the bank tell her whom she might feed. But her hands shook doing it, and she stood a moment in the cold, with her arms wrapped round herself, looking down the empty road, and for the first time in 8 years she felt the ground she stood on move under her. 2 things she did not know, standing there. She did not know who the rider truly was, and she did not know how she would find £42 by the end of September. Both of those things would be answered before the year turned. Neither of them would be answered the way she thought. She kept the loaf out all through that hard autumn, even as she began to ration everything else. She cut her own bread thinner. She let the tea go weak and then go without. She sold the good hens and kept the poor layers. And she sold her mother's second-best shawl to a dealer in Bramfield and told herself she had never worn it. But the Thursday loaf she kept full-sized and white, made with the good flour, because to cut that was to admit the bank was right, and she would not admit it. Pride, Mrs. Peel would have called it, and pride it was, and it was also the last thing she owned that Crane could not post a notice on. The rider saw, he could not have said how he saw, but he had watched that post through 2 years of Thursdays, and he knew the look of the wrapping, and that autumn the linen went thinner, and the loaf some weeks went a little smaller, and he understood before she would have believed anyone could. He knew what a notice on a gate meant. He had signed papers his whole life. He rode past and he saw a woman rationing her own table and keeping a stranger's loaf full, and it worked at him on the long road home in a way he did not examine, because to examine it, it was to come near the door on the upper landing, and he was not ready for that. Not yet. Then the winter shut down over the Coombe, and Ruth fell ill. It came on her the way it comes on people who have spent themselves and not eaten enough, a chill that got into the chest and would not leave. For 3 weeks she could not stand at the oven. She lay in the box bed under every blanket she had, and Mrs. Peel came in mornings to see to the fire and the fowls, and there was no baking done at all. The oven went cold, the furs stayed stacked, and out at the gate the post stood bare, week after week, the linen cloth taken in and folded away in the drawer, because there was no loaf to wrap in it, and no strength to carry it out. 3 Thursdays, the master of Coombe Hallow rode down the long road and past a bare post. The first Thursday he told himself she had stopped. The market talk had shamed her, or the bank had beaten her, and she had given up the custom, and it was nothing to him. He rode on. But the house that night was very quiet, and the hour before dark had lost the one thing that had lately made it bearable, and he lay awake and found that a bare gate post 400 yards down his own road had got somehow into the middle of his chest. The second Thursday he slowed at the gate. The cottage had smoke at the chimney, thin smoke, a keeping alive fire and not a baking one. He sat the grey horse a long moment in the cold and looked at the dark windows and told himself it was no business of his, and rode on and did not believe himself at all. The third Thursday he could not bear it. He did not go to the door. A man like Thorne did not go to a woman's door with questions. It was not in him, and it would have frightened her, and he knew it. He went to the smithy instead. Tom Farthing had the forge at the crossroads, and Tom Farthing knew everything that moved in the Coombe, and Thorne found a reason to have the grey looked at, and while Farthing had the foot up he asked, as idle as he could make it, after the holding by the low gate. "Mrs. Aldous?" Farthing set the foot down. "Bad way, Sir Chest, this 3 week. Mrs. Peel's been nursing her." He wiped his hands. "Won't take help, that one." "Never would. But between us, sir, she's short. Short of everything. The bank's called her paper in, and there's no flour in the house to bake with, even was she fit to. Sold near all she had." He shook his head. "Pity of it. Best woman in the parish, and the road'll go hungry this winter for want of her." Thorne said it was a pity, and paid for the shoe, and rode home the long way in the early dark, with those words going round in him. No flour in the house, the road'll go hungry for want of her. A woman who had fed strangers for 2 years, laid up ill with a bare cupboard, and a notice on her gate, and too proud to take a hand from a living soul. He was awake most of that night, not with grief, for once. With something he had thought was dead in him, along with the rest, and was not dead, and was in fact sitting up and looking about it for the first time in 9 years. Before it was light the next morning, before even Mrs. Peel would be stirring, Nathaniel Thorne rode down to the low gate with a full sack of good milled flour across his saddle-bow, 100 weight of it, the best from his own account at the mill. He got down at the gate in the grey cold, and he lifted the sack, and he set it inside the gate, in against the post where the loaf used to sit. He arranged it with a care that would have surprised anyone who knew him. He set it so that it looked left, not given, so that a proud woman finding it might tell herself it was the parish relief, or the rector, or some charity of the poor box, and need thank no one, and feel small before no one. He left no word. He left nothing of himself on it at all. It was only flour. That was what he told himself, standing there in the dark with his breath smoking, before he got back on the grey and rode away up his own road. It was only a sack of flour, a small thing, nothing a man of his means would even miss. He told himself that all the way home. He did not let himself know that in 2 years of riding past that gate, of loaves he would not take, and hats tipped, and one bare post that had kept him awake 3 nights running, it was the first thing he had ever done that was meant, wholly and only, for her. And down at the 3rd holding, Ruth Aldous was mending. The fever had broken in the night. In a day or 2 she would be strong enough to cross her own yard and open her own gate, and find a full sack of the best flour standing in against the post where her mother's loaf had always gone. She would have no idea in the world where it had come from. And she would be wrong about that, too. She found it on a Tuesday, 3 days after she could stand. The morning was raw. Her legs were still the legs of a sick woman, and she held the doorframe going out. But she went out. She crossed her own yard, slow, one hand along the wall, and she opened her own gate. And there it was, a sack. A full 100-weight of good milled flour set in against the post where her mother's loaf had always gone. Ruth stood and looked at it a long while. She thought it was the parish. Who else? The rector, maybe, or the poor box, or some Christian soul who had heard a widow lay ill and short. She was not a woman who cried easily. She had buried a husband 8 years back and not made a show of it. But she stood at her gate in the cold that morning with her hand on a sack of flour, and her eyes stung, and she let them. Then she wiped her face on her sleeve, and she carried it in, a little at a time, in a bowl, because she had no strength to lift the whole of it. It took her the best part of an hour. She did not mind. She had flour again. On Thursday there would be a loaf on the post, and there was. She wrapped it in the clean linen the way her mother had. She set it out before light. She did not watch to see who took it. She never had. That was the whole of the dignity of the thing. You gave, and you looked away, so the taking cost no one their pride. What she did not know was that a man on a grey horse rode past that morning and saw the loaf back on the post, and that the man let out a breath he had been holding for 3 weeks. It was the next Thursday that the horse cast a shoe. She heard it before she saw it, the clatter, and then a man's low voice gentling an animal. She came round the corner of her hedge, and there he was. The far farm tenant, she still believed, the proud one who would not take charity bread. He had got down, and he had the greys near hind foot up, and he was frowning at it. "He's thrown it clean off," Ruth said. "He has." Thorne set the foot down. "And Farthing's 2 miles the other way, at the crossroads. Then you'll walk him or you'll lame him. I know it." She looked at the horse. It was a good horse, better than anything on the far farm ought to keep, but she thought nothing of that. Poor men sometimes kept one fine thing. She had known that too. "Bring him into my yard," she said. "There's shade, and there's water. I'll hold his head while you see to the foot. You can send the smith up when you find him." He looked at her. It was a long look, longer than the moment wanted. Then he said, "That's kind." "It's water," Ruth said. "It's not kind." She held the grey's head. Thorne stood by the cast foot and did what a man can do without an anvil, which is little. And for 11 minutes, no more, the two of them stood in a widow's yard and talked. Not of anything. Of the weather, which was turning. Of the wheat, which had come poor that year across the whole coombe. He did not give his name, and she did not ask it. She gave hers, plain, Aldous, and he only nodded, as though he had known it a long time, which he had. 11 minutes, 2 years of Thursdays, and 11 minutes of speech. Then Farthing came up the road with his bag, and shod the grey at her gate, and the tenant tipped his hat and rode away. The short way, for once. He did not trust the foot for 4 extra miles. Ruth stood at her gate and watched him go, which she had never once done before. He came again the next Thursday. He did not need to. There was no cast shoe, no water wanted. He simply drew the grey up at her post, where the loaf sat wrapped in linen, and he looked at it, and then he looked at her in her doorway. "I've wondered," he said. 2 years I've ridden by this gate, and every Thursday but the 3 you were sick, there's been a loaf on this post. Who's it for?" Ruth wiped her hands on her apron. "The travelling poor," she said, "the men on the road. My mother baked one every Thursday of her life and set it here so they'd know where to look. There's a law lets them take it. She kept the custom 40 years. I keep it now, and you never see who takes it. That's the point of it," she said. "You don't watch a hungry man eat. You leave it, and you go in, and it's gone by dark, and no one owes anyone a thing." Thorn said nothing to that for a moment. He turned in his saddle and looked back down the empty road behind him. The long road. The 4 miles that were 4 miles longer than any sensible way home. Ruth thought it a strange thing to do, to look at nothing. Then he faced front again, and he tipped his hat and he rode on. He did not say the true thing. He was not ready. But something in him had shifted, and he knew it, riding home in the failing light. It was the miller's boy who undid the whole quiet arrangement. Ruth went into Bramfield that Saturday for salt and a reel of thread. She stopped at the mill to pay down a few pence against her account, and the boy at the scale was a talker, the way boys are. "You're baking again then, Mrs. Aldous," he said. "We heard you was bad. I'm mended. That's good flour you've got up your way now." He grinned. "A whole hundredweight. Best on our books." "Ordered up special, that was." Ruth went still. "Ordered by whom?" The boy caught himself too late, the way boys do. He looked at his scale. "The house," he mumbled. "Up to Coombe Hallow. Mr. Thorne's account." "Mr. Thorne, I, the master." The boy shrugged, uneasy now. "It's all his. Mrs. Aldous, the whole Coombe. Gate to ridge. Always has been." Ruth walked home the 4 miles in a silence that had nothing quiet in it. Thorne, the master of Coombe Hallow. She turned it over and over. The far farm tenant who was no tenant. The proud poor man who was the richest man in the parish. The one she had held herself back from pitying, out of respect for his poverty, because she thought he was too proud to take a widow's bread. And it was worse than that. It came to her slow, on that long road, in pieces. The gate stood on his land. It had stood on Thornland since her grandfather's day. The loaf she set out every Thursday for 2 years, in her small pride, her mother's kept custom, she had been setting on the ground that a rich man owned. She had been giving charity bread to the man who owned the very post it sat on. And he had ridden past it, week on week, and watched her do it, and said not one word. She stopped on the road and pressed her hand flat to her chest, the rider on the grey. The long way round, 4 miles out of any reason. She had told herself a soft story about a proud poor neighbour, and the truth of him was something else entirely, and she did not yet know the half of it, only that she had been made a fool of, and had made a fool of herself, in the sight of a man who could have set her whole holding right with the loose coin in his coat. She learned the rest from Mrs. Peel that same week, though Mrs. Peel did not know she was giving a wound. "Thorne," said Mrs. Peel, over the wall, glad of the subject. "Poor soul, 9 years now. He lost his Clara and the babe in 1 week of the same fever, and there was to be a christening, and there was 2 burials instead. He shut the house up round himself. Won't come into it before dark, they say. Rides the hills till the light's gone so he needn't sit in it. 9 years, Ruth, there's a door up on his top landings not been opened since." The nursery. shut the day they carried the little one out. Ruth said nothing. "That's why he goes the long way," said Mrs. Peel, comfortable, not seeing. "Everyone knows it. Fills the hour before dark so he needn't be home in the light. Nothing to do with your gait, love," and here she smiled, meaning kindness. "Though the whole market thinks you bake that Thursday loaf for him. Mind, feeding the far farm tenant, they say." I never told them different, so there it was, the last stone laid on the pile. The long road was grief. It was not a message, and it had never been a message, and least of all a message to her. He rode past her gate, not because a loaf was on it, but because a door was shut in his own house. She had been a thing beside the road he happened to pass on his way from one sorrow to another, and the whole of Bramfield thought she baked for him. A widow angling for a landlord. That was the picture. That was what they smiled at over the market stalls. Ruth went home, and she was quiet for a long time. Then Crane came. He came on the Thursday, of all days, with the loaf sitting out on the post between them as he talked. He did not get down from his gig. He read from his paper as if he were reading the time of a coach. Michaelmas, Mrs. Aldous, the 29th of September. £42, or the holding reverts to the bank. There'll be no further notice given after this one. He looked at her over the paper, and he looked at the loaf, and his mouth curled. A woman who gives her bread away has none to sell. The bank counts loaves, Mrs. Aldous, not kindness. He had said the same to her once before. He liked it enough to say it twice. "I have till Michaelmas," Ruth said. "You have till Michaelmas." He folded the paper. "You have £4 and some shillings in a tin behind your clock, is my guess, and a good name, and neither pays a mortgage." He clicked to his horse. "Good day to you." She went in when he had gone. She stood in her own kitchen. She took the tin down from behind the clock, and she counted what was in it, which she already knew. £4 and some shillings, against 42 by the 29th of September. It could not be done. It had never been able to be done. And now she knew the other thing. The flour, the hundredweight, set so careful against the post that she might tell herself it was the parish. She saw it plain now for what it was, not the poor box, not the rector. Thorne, the master, who owned the ground and the gate and the debt on half the coombe, leaving a sack of flour to the fool woman who fed his own land as though it were charity, letting her believe it was the parish so she'd not feel the size of what she was. Pity, it was pity, dressed up careful so it wouldn't show. Her pride would not carry it. It was a good pride, and it had kept her alive through worse, and it would not carry this. So the next Thursday she baked no loaf. She took her mother's clean linen cloth from the drawer where it had lain folded since her illness. She carried it out to the gate in the grey light, and she set it on the post. Empty, folded square and empty, no loaf inside it, nothing to take. Then she went in and shut her door. It was not spite. Understand that. It was the only thing a woman with nothing left but her name could say without a word. I know now. I know what you are and what I am. I take nothing more from you, and I ask nothing, and here is the cloth. Empty. So you'll know I know. Thorne rode down the coombe that morning, as he had ridden it 2 years of mornings. He drew the grey up at the third gate, out of habit his hands had learned before his heart did, and he saw the folded cloth on the post. Empty, he sat the horse a long time in front of it. He understood it. He was not a stupid man, only a shut one, and he understood every fold of that empty cloth as plain as if she had stood at the gate and said it to his face. She knew. She knew who he was, and she knew about the flour, and she had read it as pity, and she was too proud to be pitied, and she was right to be. His silence had cost her this. 2 years he had let her think him no one, because being no one was a rest. And the price of his rest was a proud woman standing at a bare post in the cold, giving him back the only thing she had, which was nothing at all. He did not ride the long way home that night. He rode straight up to his own gate in the last of the light, and he sat under his own shut windows, and for the first time in 9 years the house was not the worst thing he could think of. Farthing found him the next day and did not soften it. "She never knew, master," the smith said, blunt over the anvil. 2 years she thought you the poor tenant at the far farm, thought you too proud for her bread. She never angled after you, whatever the market says. That flower you left, the parish thinks the parish sent it, and she thought so too, till my miller's fool of a boy let your name slip. He struck the iron once. She's a good woman in a hard place. 42 by Michaelmas or Crane has the roof off her. And Crane, master, since you'll hear it from someone, has been calling paper across this coombe that the bank never warranted. Foreclosing wide. Buying cheap what he forecloses, or means to. Half the small holders are near ruined, and it's him doing it, not the bank. Mrs. Peel told him the rest, cornering him at the crossroads with no fear of him at all. She told him of the rationed table, the thin wrapping he'd noticed and not understood, the way Ruth had kept the charity loaf full while she went short herself. She told him plainly what he was too far inside his own grief to have seen. And Thorne stood at the crossroads and looked back down the road toward the third gate, and he made himself ask the question at last. Why did he ride the long way? 9 years the answer had been the house. The shut door, the light he couldn't sit in, but it was not the house any more. It had not been the house for months, and he had not let himself know it. It had been a gate, a loaf wrapped in linen, a woman who looked away when she gave, so no man need feel small. Somewhere in 2 years of Thursdays, the 4 miles had stopped being about what he was riding from and become about what he was riding past. He could not say the day it changed, only that it had. He was done being no one. Being no one had cost her too much. Michaelmas fell on a Tuesday that year. The parish held its rent audit in the vestry, as it did every year, and Crane presided over it, as he had these several years, with the bank's ledger open and his manor open wider. The small holders came in one by one to be told what they owed and what would be taken. Mrs. Peel stood along the cold wall. Job Weller was there, the hand Ruth had sutured long-heeled. Ruth came because she would not hide from it. She stood straight, and she waited her name. The vestry door opened, and Nathaniel Thorne walked in. The room went quiet the way a room does when it does not believe its own eyes. 9 years. 9 years the coombe had not seen its master under a public roof. Crane's face did a slow, strange thing. Thorne did not sit. He came to the table, and he set down a leather folder, and he opened it, and he laid out bank drafts one after another like a man dealing cards. He named the holdings as he laid them. Weller's, Peel's, the Hobbs place. 6, 8, 10 of them. Each arrear cleared to the penny, drawn on his own account, the estate's own coin. These are paid, he said, every small holding in the coombe. The arrears are met. He set down one more. The Aldous holding, £42, paid in full. The paper is discharged. Ruth did not move. Then Thorne turned to Crane, and his voice did not rise, which made it worse. You've been calling notes this bank never warranted, Crane, foreclosing beyond your writ, on holdings the bank had no claim to call, and standing ready to buy the ground cheap the moment it fell. On my coombe, against my tenants. He set a last paper on the table, the bank's own warrant, and beside it Crane's notices, and the room could see the two did not match. The bank will hear of it before dark. You're finished here. Crane opened his mouth. He was a man who always had a line ready. He found none. In the same room where he had told a widow the bank counts loaves and not kindness, he stood and had nothing, and every neighbour along the wall watched him have it. Then Thorn turned from him as though he were already gone, and he faced Ruth Aldous across the vestry, before the whole parish. It was not a speech. He was not a man of speeches. He said, "For 2 years I rode 4 miles out of my way, and I told myself it was the house I was avoiding." He stopped. The room was so still you could hear the tallow gutter. It was not the house. That was all. He did not kneel, and he did not flourish. He let the plain words stand. Ruth did not perform for them. She did not weep for the parish to see, or smile, or say a soft thing to please the wall of watching faces. She looked at him a long moment, the way she had looked at the sack of flour that first cold morning, weighing what was true in it. "You let me think you were poor," she said. "I did. You let the whole market think I baked for you. I did that too. And I was wrong in it. In all of it." He held her eye. "I'm not asking you to forgive the whole of 9 years in a cold room, Mrs. Aldous. I'm asking if I might walk you home the short way." And Ruth, after a moment, said, "You may walk, I'll not be walked," which the parish did not understand, and which Thorn understood exactly, and which was, from her, a yes. He walked her home. Not leading, beside, and at her gate he stopped, and he did a thing that surprised her. He did not come in. He said, "There's a door in my house I've not opened in 9 years. I'd not ask you across a threshold I can't cross myself. Come with me tomorrow, before dark, and I'll open it. I'd have you there when I do." Dusk the next day found them at Coombe Hallow, at the foot of the great shut-house, with the light going gold and low over the ridge. Thorn walked to his own front door before dark. 9 years he had not done it. He did it now, with Ruth beside him, and his hand was not steady on the latch, and she did not take it from him. He opened it himself. They went up. To the upper landing, and the door that had been shut since the day they carried his child out, there was an old woman waiting on the landing, small and straight in black. Clara's mother, kept away all these years, and come now, sent for. She looked at her dead daughter's husband, and she looked at the woman beside him, and she understood the whole of it in the way old women do. Thorn opened the nursery door. The hinges cried for want of oil. The room beyond was grey, with 9 years of still dust, and the last light came through the window and lay across the floor. There was a cradle, there was a chair by the window, the chair where Clara had meant to sit, where she never sat. That was all. A cradle and a chair and 9 years of quiet. Thorn stood in the door of it and did not go to pieces. He had done his going to pieces long ago. Alone, he only stood and breathed the cold shut air of it and let it be a room at last instead of a wound. The old woman came and stood by him. She put her thin hand on his arm. "She'd not have had you stop in this doorway forever, Nathaniel," she said. "My Clara." She hadn't a jealous bone. She'd not thank you for making a shrine of her, nor a monk of yourself. If there's a good woman will walk you in out of the cold, you let her. She looked at Ruth, and she nodded once, the whole blessing in it. You let her. Ruth had brought her mother's cloth. The clean linen, she had brought it without quite knowing why. And there in the last of the light she stepped past them, into the room that had been shut 9 years, and she set the cloth on the window-sill, folded square, by the chair where Clara had meant to sit. A plain thing, a cloth on a sill. But it belonged there now, and they all three felt that it did. They left the door open when they went down. It stayed open after. The Thursday that came was a strange one, and a good one. Ruth baked. She baked the traveller's loaf as she had every Thursday of 2 years, as her mother had for 40 before her. That loaf went out. The custom was not broken, it would never be broken while she lived. But there was a second loaf that day, and the second loaf did not go on the gate-post for a stranger to guess at in the dark. It went on Thorn's own table. At Coombe Hallow, cut for 2. They sat, and they ate it between them, the master of the coombe and the widow from the third gate, and there was no post between them any more, and no long road, and nothing left to leave against a post and pretend was the parish. The habit was spoken at last. It had taken 2 years to say a thing that took 1 supper to do. A year on, it was spring on the ridge. The holding was still Ruth's. She had insisted on it, and she was a woman you did not easily move, and so the paper stayed in her name. Hers, kept and clear. The coombe's small holders were secure, not one had gone under. And Crane's schemes had gone into the fire with his post. The whole valley, gate to ridge, breathed easier than it had in years, and every Thursday there was a loaf on the third gate post again, wrapped in clean linen, for the travelling poor, so they would know where to look. Only now it was Thorn who rode out to set it there, on the grey, in the early light. He rode the short way. There was no longer an hour to fill before dark, no house he could not enter, no light he could not sit in. There was only a loaf to set out, and a woman waiting up the yard, and a door left open at the top of a house that had once been shut. He met Crane once, that spring on the Bramfield Road. Crane was dismissed from the bank by then, and going somewhere lesser. And he tipped his hat as they passed, from long habit or hope, one or the other. Ruth was on the seat beside Thorn. She looked at the man who had counted her loaves, and not her kindness, and she gave him 2 words. "Good day," said Ruth, and nothing more. And they went on by. Think on it. 2 people rode and baked the same hour, apart, for 2 years, before either one knew why. A loaf set out and looked away from, a road ridden 4 miles too long, neither meant for the other, and both, in the end, entirely for the other. And the day the reason changed, the day he finally said the plain true thing in a cold stone room, was the day the 2 of them began. It is never too late for the heart, not at 38 and 8 years a widow, not at 44, with a door shut 9 years, not so long as there's 1 warm loaf and 1 hand willing to set it out, and 1 road home you finally choose to ride the short way. If a quiet story like this one warmed you tonight, stay a while and comment the town you're watching from. I'd like to see how far a little bread and kindness can travel.